All rise, Würde Vilve. Please be seated.
Before we continue, Mr. Mladić, the Chamber would like to deliver a short decision. It is a decision on two defense motions to admit a total of 4 statements pursuant to Rule 85A of the rules. These motions were filed on the 5th and the 7th of December 2016. The prosecution responded to the motions on the 8th and the 9th of December, and the defense filed a further response on the 9th of December, which was, I think, formally distributed only this morning. The defense submits that the 4 statements are crucial to a fair determination of the sentence should the chamber find the accused guilty. According to the defense, the statements confirm the accused's good character. The prosecution opposes the motions, arguing that the defense makes no effort to show good cause for filing the motions more than 3 months after the deadline for such motions. It submits that the defense fails to demonstrate that the interests of justice necessitate admitting the statements. With regard to 3 of the statements, the prosecution submits that they focus on matters in controversy in this case, thereby falling outside the ambit of Rule 85A, small vi of the rules. Should the chamber admit the statements, the prosecution tenders 1 document to provide further context. The chamber recalls that it had set 25th of August 2016 as the deadline for motions pursuant to Rule 85A, small vi of the rules. The defense requested an extension of this deadline, which was denied by the chamber on the 2nd of September 2016. A subsequent motion for certification to appeal the 2nd of September 2016 decision was denied by the chamber on the 11th November 2016. The defense has failed to demonstrate good cause for filing the motions at this stage, let alone acknowledge the just mentioned procedural background. Nonetheless, the chamber will consider whether it is consistent with the interest of justice to exceptionally deviate from the procedural requirements of admitting sentence-related information pursuant to Rule 85A, small vi of the rules at this stage. The chamber considers that the defense had announced in August 2016 that it would like to tender certain sentence-related statements. The 3 statements tendered in the 5th of December motion contain information of direct interactions with the accused. The chamber also considered the relationship between those providing the statement and the accused, as well as the fact that the statements are very limited in scope. The chamber further considers that the statements were tendered at such time early during the closing arguments, making it possible for both parties to still prepare and address them and make submissions on how they should be weighed. The chamber lastly considers it of importance to give the defense 1 final opportunity to have certain limited evidence introduced in this case. Under these circumstances, the chamber finds it consistent with the interest of justice to exceptionally admit the three statements tendered in the 5th of December motion into evidence at this stage. The Chamber emphasizes that this admission is limited to sentencing purposes. Any other information contained in the statements will be disregarded by the Chamber. The Chamber considers that the statement contained in the 7th of December motion reveals that the person given the statement never even met with the accused. Further, the statement mainly deals with matters which the Chamber is unable to understand as being focused on sentencing. Under these circumstances, the Chamber considers this statement to be of no assistance to the Chamber for sentencing purposes. In relation to the document tendered by the prosecution, the Chamber observes that this document seeks to place in context certain information contained in the statements regarding whether Muslims were expelled. However, as the Chamber will merely admit the statements for sentencing purposes, there is no need to supplement the statements with further information in relation to certain crimes. Accordingly, the Chamber admits the three statements tendered in the 5th of December motion, denies admission of the document tendered by the prosecution, and denies admission of the statement tendered in the 7th of December motion. Then, Mr. Lukic, the statements were submitted in a confidential annex. Are you tendering them under seal? And if so, what would be the basis for tendering them under seal?
Can we go to the private session, please?
Yes, we'll briefly move into private session.
Back in open session, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Registrar. Would you please reserve 3 D numbers for statements still to be uploaded by the defense in relation to sentencing?
Yes, Your Honor, those will be exhibits D2182 through D2184.
Yes, and once they are uploaded and once we decided on them being under seal or not, will then further instruct you to attach statements to these provisionally reserved numbers.
It remains under seal provisionally.
Yes, provisionally they remain under seal until we have decided otherwise. Then, Mr. Mladić, if you're ready to proceed, please do so.
Thank you, Your Honors. Also significant to the prosecution's overarching JCE theory, the accused at this assembly challenged Mladić and Krajisnik, asking the rhetorical question that if the 6 strategic objectives which they had just promulgated were interpreted as genocide, that they would be unable to, quote, explain that to the world, P431, page 35. The timing and context of this warning are critical to a proper understanding of the accused's state of mind. It is difficult to see where a commitment to the permanent removal of Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croats could be inferred from a principled and robust, if understandably cautious, opposition to a more pernicious interpretation of the 6 strategic objectives and to the Bosnian Serb Assembly leadership. As argued in the defense brief, paragraphs, we can have the next slide, slide 13, that one. As argued in the defense brief, paragraphs 795 to 796, the accused espoused principles of discipline and fairness, which are inconsistent with the intent of the overarching JCE. The accused commanded the VRS, fully aware that ill discipline and criminality were counterproductive to military efficacy. General Mladić pursued peace and cooperated in agreements that called for a permanent ceasefire for the whole territory, D944. Yet the Muslim leaders obstructed his attempts, with their forces performing offensive operations during the cessation of hostilities in Sarajevo. Mladić, in a letter to UNPROFOR Command, listed 803 violations of the cessation of hostilities agreement by the Muslim forces between 23 December 1994 and 2 March 1995. That's D1665. The prosecution used numerous statements made by others in Mladić's presence to prove Mladić's intent. But limited conclusions may be drawn about Mladić's intent from some selective inflammatory statements of politicians at meetings he attended. This is particularly true given the evidence that Mladić expressed his disagreement and at times made conciliatory statements at these meetings. The terms strategic objectives and strategic goals can have 2 different meanings. The 6 political strategic objectives or legitimate military operations which the prosecution has not acknowledged, thus causing confusion when references to goals or objectives in military orders could be in reference to legitimate military targets or the political objectives. For example, at footnote 2125 of the prosecution brief, The standing orders of the RS Assembly of 12 May 1992, when the objectives were adopted, refers to them as, quote, strategic goals, end quote. Citation footnote 2352 of the prosecution brief, a VRS order signed by the accused refers to, quote, achieving the strategic goals in 1994, end quote. P 4268, page 6. Yet at citation 106, military expert Tunins and the VRS combat report refers to them as, quote, objectives, end quote. 3029, P3029, and P324. The distinction between the two terms is important, as the prosecution, at the beginning of each municipality analysis and throughout its brief, attempt to link alleged crimes with the political strategic objectives. Mladić was asked about drawing this link with Directive 1 at transcript page 37378, and he replied, quote, no, one cannot formulate it that way. The goal was always to keep those who were loyal and who forwarded the policies of Republika Srpska and who were prepared to stay in the area, to keep them in the area and include them in the armed force, rather than separating the peoples in a very determined way, end quote. If we can have the next slide. The accused demonstrated his intent to prohibit the abuse of civilians by issuing orders to protect civilians from violence. These were not toothless or superficial, as the prosecution wants you to believe, but examples that show reasonable doubt that the accused was the member of a JCE furthering a common criminal plan. P474 is what we see before us, and we've talked about it already, and we see on this slide the protections ordered by General Mladić for civilians and for POWs. Next slide. D187, also issued by Ratko Mladić, and I read item number 1, quote, the cruel treatments are severely forbidden, as well as abuse and physical destruction of civil population, prisoners of war, and members of the international organizations. Next slide. D1514. We have an order from the accused, dated 28 November 1992. That says, quote, according to available data, unknown persons disturbed Muslim population in Esperati and Vrbarje. In this regard, order, I immediately take measures to protect the Muslim population in these villages from possible violence from individuals because they expressed loyalty to the Republika Srpska, end quote. Next slide. And the VRS did take efforts.
Mr. Mladić, I think there was a wrong quotation. It was not I immediately, but one immediately. It was a numerical one.
It's possible, Your Honor. My eyes have been deceiving me lately.
Just for the record. Thank you.
And the VRS did take efforts to protect non-Serbs from violence. At D424, paragraph 3, we have the 1st KK command protecting the Muslim population from locals. Quote, the actions of irresponsible individuals have caused uneasiness among the Muslim population in the villages of Batkovac and Stari Maidan. The 1st KK command intervened by sending a military police platoon to protect the population from irresponsible individuals, end quote. But, as generally occurs in a war, there was considerable migration. There were a number of reasons for migration not attributable to Mladić or the VRS, addressed at paragraphs 778 through 779 of the defense brief. For example, there were concerns about safety and fear of the war spreading. If we could skip one slide and go to slide 19. There were several reasons why more non-Serbs would have left their homes. There were instructions from the Muslim and Croat authorities themselves. We have D 699, paragraph 31, D 884, paragraph 20, for example. And then we have here on the screen D 193. SDA instructions for moving out of Trebinje that state, quote, through our activists, stimulate all Muslims, especially prominent and wealthy ones, to leave Trebinje as soon as possible and cross over onto Montenegro. Do not shy away from using pressure or even force against Muslims who do not observe this order, end quote.
Mr. Mladić, of course we could look at it, but do you have a time frame for it, just for now to be better able to follow your
I would have to get back to you with that. I don't have that in my notes.
Thank you.
There were instances where civilians were temporarily removed from an area, as discussed at paragraphs 780 to 781 of the defense brief. Under international humanitarian law, the displacement of civilian populations is permissible under two alternative grounds. Quote, the security of the population or imperative military reasons so demand, end quote. I refer the court to paragraph 93 of the Gotovina appeals decision, where that chamber noted that certain evidence relied on to prove a JCE could have referred to, quote, a lawful consensus on helping civilians temporarily depart from an area of conflict for reasons including legitimate military advantage and casualty reduction. Thus, discussion of pretexts for artillery attacks, of potential civilian departures, and of provision of exit corridors could be reasonably interpreted as referring to lawful combat operations and public relations efforts, end quote. The prosecution asks the chamber to consider all actions taken by the alleged JC members as taken in pursuit of that common criminal purpose at paragraphs 499 to 528 of their brief. It fails to address alternative, equally available explanations reasonable under the evidence, especially that Mladić would be working with government officials in the furtherance of his lawful military duties. Numerous meetings between Mladić and civilian leaders would be completely lawful and expected. The 11 alleged members, with the exception of Arkan, were RS or Serbian government officials. The accused had a legal duty to meet and discuss the military situation with members of the RS presidency. In attempting to use meeting notes and transcripts to prove cooperation, the prosecution has actually highlighted the absence of any discussion of any criminal plan. although there were various detention centers clearly established and run by different groups, the prosecution submits that they were actually one system. The true fact is that the VRS ran only 2 detention facilities, Mladić and Batković. Mladić was first established in late 1991 by the JNA, and then it was closed down and later reopened as a POW camp to hold suspects accused of attacks on the military. It is discussed at paragraphs 510, 705 to 726, and 839 to 906 of the defense brief. The prosecution has argued that most prisoners at Mladić were civilians and that there was no basis for their detention. However, the evidence demonstrated that there was a detailed admission procedure for POWs and suspected combatants, and all detainees were registered.